The millionaire stopped in shock when he saw an elderly couple collapsed in the rain outside his mansion. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Arthur Thorne's penthouse study, blurring the glittering Manhattan skyline into streaks of gold and gray. Inside, the air hummed with sterile silence, broken only by the soft tick of $1 million watch and the distant wail of a siren, the city's indifferent heartbeat. Arthur, impeccably tailored even at 11 p.m., stared at a spreadsheet glowing on his monitor. Another billion-dollar deal secured. Another lonely victory. He'd built an empire brick by ruthless brick, but the mansion felt less like a home and more like a beautifully appointed tomb. Driven by a sudden, inexplicable restlessness, he grabbed his bespoke overcoat and stepped onto the sweeping driveway. The rain hit him like a physical blow, cold, relentless, washing away the city's grime and perhaps some of his own carefully constructed numbness. He walked towards the imposing wrought iron gates, the gravel crunching under his Italian loafers, already regretting the impulsive venture. Then he saw them. Huddled against the cold stone base of his gatepost, barely visible in the downpour, were two figures, an elderly man and woman, soaked to the bone, their thin clothes plastered to frail frames. The man was slumped sideways, his head lolling, while the woman clutched his arm, her face etched with exhaustion and terror, her eyes wide and pleading as they met Arthur's across the rain-slicked distance. They weren't beggars. They looked lost. Utterly, devastatingly lost. Arthur froze. His first instinct, honed by years of boardroom battles and guarded wealth, was suspicion. Scam? Drunk? Trouble? But the raw vulnerability in the woman's eyes, the sheer weight of their despair cutting through the storm, struck him like a physical blow. He saw not potential liability, but human beings drowning, not just in rain, but in circumstance. "Good God," he breathed, the words snatched away by the wind. Without another thought, he sprinted back towards the house, barking orders into his intercom. "James, call an ambulance, now, and bring blankets, thick ones." He returned to the gate, kneeling in the mud, heedless to the ruin to his trousers. "It's all right," he said, his voice rougher than intended, trying to project calm he didn't feel. "Help is coming. Can you tell me your names?" The woman, shivering violently, managed a whisper. "Eleanor. And my husband Henry. Our apartment. The landlord, She couldn't finish, a sob racking her thin frame. Henry remained unconscious, his breathing shallow. The ambulance arrived with flashing lights that painted the rain red and blue. Arthur insisted on riding with them, ignoring the paramedics' initial surprise at the impeccably dressed man covered in mud. In the sterile, bouncing ambulance, holding Eleanor's icy hand, Arthur learned their story in fragmented gasps. Henry, a retired mechanic, had suffered a stroke months ago. Medical bills swallowed their meager savings. Then the final blow. Their rent-controlled apartment was sold, and the new owner, citing renovations, evicted them with nowhere to go. Pride and dwindling options kept them from shelters until the rain and Henry's worsening condition left them stranded, literally, at the gates of unimaginable wealth. At the hospital, Arthur didn't leave. He used his name, his influence, to ensure Henry got the best neurologist immediately. He paid the astronomical deposit for a private room without blinking. He sat with Eleanor in the harshly lit waiting area, listening as she spoke of their life, a small bakery they'd run for 40 years, Sunday walks in the park, the simple joy of shared silence. Her quiet dignity in the face of utter ruin humbled him. Days turned into weeks. Henry stabilized, but the road to recovery was long and expensive. Arthur didn't just pay the bills, he saw them. He saw Eleanor's fierce love as she coaxed Henry to take sips of water, her hands trembling but steady. He saw the decades of partnership in the way she adjusted his pillow, the unspoken language between them. He saw the life he'd sacrificed for his empire, connection, warmth, meaning. One afternoon, watching Eleanor gently wipe Henry's brow, Arthur made a decision that felt less like charity and more like necessity. He found a small, sun-drenched apartment in a quiet building near the hospital, accessible, with a view of trees, not steel canyons. He furnished it simply, but comfortably, with a sturdy armchair for Henry and a cozy kitchen nook Eleanor could manage. He set up a trust fund, not as a handout, but as a safety net, ensuring their medical needs and basic dignity were secured for life. He even tracked down the recipe for Eleanor's famous cinnamon rolls and had a local bakery deliver them weekly. The day they moved in, Arthur stood awkwardly in the doorway of their new living room. Henry, leaning heavily on a walker, but standing, offered a weak but genuine smile. Eleanor, tears streaming down her face, took Arthur's hands in hers. They were work-worn, but warm. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "you didn't just save our lives that night in the rain. You gave us back our home, our dignity. You gave us hope." Arthur, the man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets, found his own throat tight. He looked around the simple, warm space, the framed photo of a younger Henry and Eleanor on their wedding day, the smell of coffee brewing, the sound of Henry humming softly. It felt more real, more alive than his entire penthouse ever had. "No, Eleanor," he said quietly, the rain from that night finally washing something clean inside him. "You gave me something far more precious. You reminded me what it means to be human." He didn't become their benefactor in the distant, detached way he managed his investments. He became Arthur. He visited. He brought groceries. He listened to Henry's stories about carburetors. He shared quiet cups of tea with Eleanor. The icy walls of his mansion began to feel less like a fortress and more like a cage he was finally ready to leave. The rain that night hadn't just drenched an elderly couple. It had cracked open the heart of a lonely millionaire. In rescuing them, Arthur Thorne hadn't just changed their lives. He'd finally found his own. And sometimes the greatest fortune isn't counted in billions, but in the quiet warmth of a shared cup of tea and the profound relief of knowing you're not alone in the storm.